I just really wanted to comment on some of the things that had been going on with iShowSpeed, and I will be dropping a video that will be featuring a man by the name of Dr. Taharka Ade, and we will talk a little bit about this concept of Afrocentrism in Egypt.
Hey, what happened to her nose?
So iShowSpeed basically is on his tour in Egypt. And while he was there, he went to the Sphinx and he asked the tour guide about the nose and like, why is the nose missing? And so the tour guide pretty much lets him know that, there was a particular person who wanted to get the people to know that they shouldn't idolize the statues, and there was like this movement to kind of prove that the statues were not gods, and they wanted to basically dehumanize them basically in a way. And I thought that was so interesting because I feel like for the past at least 2 decades there has been this myth, especially within the black community, that Napoleon and his troops intentionally shot off the noses of the pharaohs because they had negroid or negro or black African features. But now, as more research has come out by different archaeologists as well as Egyptologists, now that myth has kind of been dispelled, and now it's more so being portrayed as um, anti idolatry. And I'm willing to believe that. That's not my problem. What I'm more interested in is, how did the conversation of Afrocentrism even get into the mix? Like, how did Napoleon ever get into the mix? I feel like that was still very intentional, whether it was Napoleon or not. I feel like just the fact that it was infiltrated into so many black academia spaces, I feel like there was an intention to still somehow try to not just dehumanize the pharaohs of that time, but also somehow dehumanize the context of black African pharaohs during certain dynasties within African history, particularly in North Africa and specifically in Kemet. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is another episode of Griot of the Diaspora, and I'm your host, Nakaira G. And today we have Dr. Ade here, and we are going to be talking about a couple of different topics that have been trending on social media, and I think just also in the academic spaces. So quick question. So, have you traveled through Africa, and if so, what was that experience like?
I've only been to Egypt and the northern extremities of Sudan, so southern Egypt and that region. I'm supposed to be in Ghana for spring break this coming March. But my travels in Egypt was really interesting. I went as part of an excavation mission with Anthony Browder.
Okay,
And
I wanted to do that one.
say again?
I wanted to do that one. He came to
Oh
Ghana
yeah.
in 2022,
hmm
and did like a presentation and talked about it.
Yeah, so it was interesting because I didn't want to go like as a study tour or just a tour. I wanted to actually get my hands dirty and work, and so and I learned quite a bit about archaeology, Egyptology, the work side of it, like what it actually takes to discover the things that you're discovering and piece things together, and all the meticulous uh, work that goes into it. Um, and also, I learned quite a bit about people there, and I realized that Cairo and Luxor, for example, are almost worlds apart, right? The people in Luxor uh, more acknowledging of their Africanity. Um, it was always this funny story I tell people. I was in Luxor and I went into this small like mom and pop grocery store, and I was looking for shampoo, and I couldn't, things are in Arabic, right? So I couldn't figure out what some of the things were saying, and so I just picked this one shampoo, and this was before Google Translate, so I didn't know what I was looking at. And I brought it to the counter, and uh, the guy at the counter, he's like, no, no, let me help you. He was like, this is for white people. He's like, you have hair like mine. Let's go get you a better, shampoo. This is gonna rip. He was literally telling me it was gonna, rip all the nutrients out of my hair and the moisture and stuff. And so he helped me. So it was really, it was a funny exchange. Walking down the street, people thought, mostly they thought I was Nubian, right? And then they get to talking to me, and I'll say something in English, and they're, oh, you're Black American. And this was during a time during the where I think it was right after Michael Brown was murdered, and there was a guy who, with tears in his eyes, was just saying, how can you allow them to do that to your people? Because they'd been watching it. It was international news. They'd been watching that kind of stuff themselves. So it was really interesting. I didn't have that type of experience in Cairo, though. So
That's interesting.
yeah.
I have to ask, so did you see a couple years ago when Egypt banned Afrocentrism from their it's not really clear. I know it's from like media as well, but it's also including
Hmm.
like their art exhibitions, their
Hmm.
exhibitions with the pyramids and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think um, one, what's a problem in the academy, and what's a problem in just the general public, is the understanding between what is actual Afrocentric scholarship, or Afrocentricity, and what is Afrocentrism, right? Which is more of a movement type of thing, juxtaposed to like actual, theoretical position, and scholarship. And so Afrocentrism gets conflated into a lot of different things. And so when you're saying you're an Afrocentric scholar and you're under the lineage of, say, in Asante and others, uh, people who are close to the scholarship understand that, okay, you're using a particular theoretical paradigm in which to do your work, but it's not myth making. You're not making up things. You're it's just as stringent as any other field. But then there's you know Afrocentrism, which is very uh, nebulous, and you have some people in the academy that might actually fall under that because they don't really know what actual Afrocentric theory is. um, and it gets confused for many different things, Africanity, things of that nature. And so you have a situation like in Egypt where they're upset with the Met, for example, for having the Sheikh Anta Diop exhibit, right? And they're saying, oh, that's Afrocentrism, and they don't understand that people have like actually, some of the people who are working on this exhibit, and the people who are writing about it, are people who praise, Diop's works, but also criticize, his, things that they might consider more fringe and things of that nature. What they're seeing and thinking is a more of a response to this kind of general public street Afrocentrism that doesn't care about the historicity of things, that just wants to present blackness in every form. And so and that's largely what people are responding to. And I think for Egypt in particular, with their special circumstance, I think when I was in Egypt, it was 8 Egyptian pounds to every English dollar, or American dollar, I should say. Now it might be 16 or above, right? Their economy is tanking, and it will cause people to start, becoming more xenophobic, start to, you know, uh, become more nationalist in the sense of, this is ours, and we don't want, these other people to claim anything that's ours, et cetera, et cetera. Not caring about any type of Pan-African, idealism. And for one, particularly in the north of Egypt, they're more aligned with the Arab world than they are with, Africa itself. Um, so it becomes, this thing that's already foundationalized by Afrophobia, and now, you can attack what others have, um, what others have argued to be a pseudo historical movement, Afrocentrism, not knowing the nuances of that movement and what is actually, actual scholarship. um, and people they're not going to care to know. What they know is that you have all these foreigners that are coming here. They make money off of, the antiquities in Egypt, and you're not going to, and any claim to its, Africanness becomes an affront to their social economy in their minds.
Egypt. But really quick, I really just wanted to talk about, just give some commentary of my thoughts so far of what's been going on with Speed. iShowSpeed. So hopefully you guys have been seeing that he has been traveling around these different parts of Africa, and obviously he went from South Africa to East Africa, and then he went up to Egypt and Algeria and then Morocco. And it was very clear when he went to Egypt that he was going to have a different experience. What's interesting though is that before he got to Egypt, on one of his live streams, he said, we're going to North Africa and it's going to be a different vibe. And he kept saying like Habibi, Habibi. I'm noticing that what is wrong with everybody saying the word Arab? Like, I don't know if maybe I didn't get the hint that we can't identify people as what they are, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, since when did the North African title just become this like universal title, and now all of a sudden everybody's African? I feel like there's propaganda with that, and it's a little uncomfortable because I feel like as the diaspora, as black people, as black African people, there is a discussion that I think needs to be had with the term sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. Because especially within black academia, we have really, like, scholars have really discussed at length the effects of the term sub-Saharan African, because it almost separates what type of African it is without saying black and Arab. And so when you go through a lot of research history, you'll see these terms, North Africa, North Africa, North Africans, Sub-Saharan Africa. And even though it's supposed to kind of describe like the geographical location of things, there's a very silent like propaganda of what these people look like, who they are, what their allies look like, what their role in history has been. And with this iShowSpeed tour, it made me realize, like, respectfully and not, there is more propaganda to erase like what the Arab world has done to Africa. And I noticed that so much, especially when he was in Egypt. I noticed how even the tour guides, they were very quick to mention, Portugal and all these other places. I believe when he was in Algeria, one of his tour guides was like, we were once ruled by Portugal and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought that was so interesting because it's like, but didn't like the Trans-Saharan slave trade, the East Africa slave trade, the Indian Ocean slave trade, like in which Arabs, Berbers, Moors, Muslims specifically participated in centuries prior to the transatlantic slave trade. And it made me realize that even today, when we talk about what's going on in the Congo, when we talk about what's going on in Sudan, so much of what's happening in Sudan is coming from the Arab world. And a lot of these like wars and battles and religious, dichotomies, these religious battles, a lot of this stuff stems from the times of the Trans-Saharan and the East Africa slave trade and the Arab slave trade, you know. But I just noticed that when we talk about North Africa, especially when it's concerning their tourism, when it's just concerning their relationship with the continent in general, it's very like innocent. It's as if Islam entered into Africa peacefully, and it's as if like that history is no longer being shared or being told. And I just feel like it really erases the truth of Africa, because for me, it bothers me when I hear people say things like, "Oh, why can't Africa get its act together? They've been independent. These countries have gotten their independence, starting with Ghana in 1957, and then even as, with Ethiopia and Eritrea being in the 90s, I hear so many people who say things like Africa should be in a better place by now. But I realize that people think that because people assume that the 400 years that we experienced here in the Americas, they think that it's also only just 400 years in Africa. And that is not true. Because prior to that 400 years, which would only be the 1600s, Europeans were in Africa building forts as early as the 1400s. And then the Arab world was also simultaneously on the continent. If you do any type of research on the conquest of Islam across the African continent, especially when you start researching Islam's relationship with the Mali and Songhai and Ghana Empire, you learn very quickly that this conquest of Islam across the continent was not just this peaceful experience. And I don't necessarily feel like this history needs to be told in a way to divide us, but I think that it needs to be told so that we understand what allyship really looks like. Because it's really off-putting to me that in 2026 with iShowSpeed's tour, that his team even allowed him to go into those countries the way that he did, and for him to not really be well informed. And even the way that he prepared going when he was saying, "Oh, we're going to be with the Habibis." And it's like, I noticed even that with the term Habibi being like this very innocent way to say Arab. And I just feel like there's something about the rebrand of the North African and the Habibi that is not really being honest about the Arab relationship with Africa. A lot of times when we see tourism for Africa, so much of the tourism in Africa is controlled by elites. And when we talk about South Africa and Southern Africa are two different things. South Africa, there's obviously a very large European population. But when you start talking about North Africa, I mean, the average person has no idea that 10 presidents in Africa are Arab. So I just find it really unfair that during his tour, you had all these comments that were like, well, why would he go? Why would he go? And it's like, well, if we're being honest, the rebranding of Dubai and Saudi Arabia, and just the rebranding of what the Arab presence has been in the world over the past 1,000 years, has completely turned into propaganda and, in a lot of ways, dishonesty. And I think it's unfair to watch all of these Black African people talk about their experiences on the continent, particularly in these predominantly Arab countries, and then it's like they just escape accountability. And I just feel like if we're going to be a culture of historical accountability, we can't just stop at Britain. We can't just stop at France. We can't just stop at Portugal and Spain and the Dutch and the German. We have to hold everybody accountable. Christianity was not the only religion that plagues the continent. It's also Islam as well, respectfully. And I just think that it's unfair to have this conversation about why Africa is so desolate. Why is Africa so poor? Why is Africa so dirty? Why is Africa all these things, if you're not going to hold accountable the powers that be, who have literal countries who are benefiting solely 100% off of resources that are coming out of the African continent. And it's also unfair to constantly throw out the the information about there are slave markets in Africa. No, there are slave markets in North Africa that are ran by Arab people who happen to be Muslim. I think that we need to be very specific on what the language is. And again, if we're going to be African first, we can't allow these religions to constantly erase what really happened. Because I would hate for us to be in another year and another decade from now still just allowing for this level of racism to exist on the continent, and we just erase it and act like, oh, well, I guess because they're not European, it's okay. I think that it's time for us to have a conversation about the effects of the terms North African, just like how we have interrogated the term Sub-Saharan African. Until next time.